Okay, so conditionals take actions based on a set of rules. So we're going to learn the concept of conditionals, the syntax of conditionals in Python, and how conditionals are used in computer programming. So think of a character on a screen, like in a video game, and you need to, that video game character is they're gonna run, they're gonna jump, they're gonna run backward or forward, stand still. So you need a way to, as a computer programmer, to enable your users to have an interaction with the game, and you need to be able to have like a set of rules that can handle that. So think of the input as being like a keyboard or a console game device, like one of these. And so they're going to press buttons to move the character around. So the program will interpret those instructions, and then it'll change the behavior of the character. So you need to handle those instructions based on user input, you need this thing called a conditional. When you, a very simple way to think about a conditional is it's used to take action based on a set of rules. That action might not literally be moving something around. That action could maybe literally, we're going to show you an example, it could be just changing a variable value. And that variable value will be used later. So that action could be like any kind of change. And you'll see people, and I think this is not the best way to think about it, you'll see often in books and in other classes, and I had to kind of unlearn this. We say that conditionals in computer programs allow computers to make decisions. They are not making decisions. This is not like AI. And this is not how AI is done based on this sort of rules. It's actually simply a programmer has told the computer explicitly what to do in different situations. If this, then that is a way to think about it if you've taken BASIC before. So we're going to have three buttons on our controller. And so if they push button A, they'll move forward. This is just an example. B, it'll move backward. Then C, it'll jump. Otherwise, if you don't hit any buttons, it's just the character is going to stand still. And the next bit, this is now what I refer to as pseudo code. So if you ever read a textbook in computer program, you see pseudo code. It's not actually the syntax, it's more conceptual. And I'll point out actually some of the differences in actual code in Python. But this is a really easy way to think about this. Now in Python, the one thing that is actually accurate code here are these keywords. So we've seen keywords before. We've seen for loops. So the for is a keyword, while is a keyword, in, like for each item in this list. These are all examples of keywords. They have a specific meaning in Python. So you can like if you see if you're typing if and you see it highlighted, that means it's a keyword. If you did capital I if, it's not going to recognize it as a keyword. But a keyword means you're telling Python, I'm starting this type of thing. So for example, or I have this specific meaning. So when it sees if, it knows you're starting a conditional. You're initializing a conditional. And the if Python, the if word in Python, that's starting that conditional. And it'll test the first thing. It'll say, so if A is true, so if literally in this case, pressing button A is true, take the first action. In that case, it was, let's say, move forward. The elif, you'll notice I have multiple elifs here. So if is like, that's my first condition. If that's not true, check the next condition. So if it's not B, A, let me check if it's B. Did you hit button B? So I'll say elif B equals true, take action. And this is, again, conceptual. This is not the actual code or syntax. The next one's elif. See, I could actually have like 1,000 buttons. The first one's if A is true, if they press button A, do this. elif B, then do that. elif C, then do that. elif D, then do that. Like, so elif is just used for all the additional conditions that you're testing for after the first one. So if elif else, my mnemonic device, my way of remembering this, if elif else, check in a condition. That's how I remember the sequence, if elif else. Elif is short for like else if. That's the way to think about it. So if elif, and it can be elif, 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 infinitely for all the different conditions. The last thing, else, that's like if all else fails is the way I remember it. It's like if none of these things are true, do this last thing. This is like kind of the default behavior for the conditional. So if elif else. That's the concept, and we're not going to drill in too much into the syntax here. This is like a rough idea of the syntax. The actual syntax in Python will be a little bit different. But think about it as a stoplight, where the default is that you drive, you go. And if is like, if you see red, that's at the stoplight, it's telling you to stop. Elif, if you see yellow, then slow down, be ready to stop. Else, obviously keep going. And we could throw in another elif. If you see the turn signal going left, then you have a different set of rules, right? So if, elif, else, you can think of, get your students to think of that as the stoplight. And so and this starts to get into closer to, this is still pseudo code. It's not actual code, but it's getting closer to Python code. But notice something, I just say if button A. And I did that for a specific reason, because what it's really saying is if this is true. Because that's exactly what it's testing. It's kind of similar to while loops in that way, because while loops are basically saying while this is true. In this case, it's just saying if this is true. So it's really a true-false statement is what's happening here. So if this is true, do this. And you'll notice, like the while loops and like for loops, it's indented for spaces. And so this right here, this is like a block of code. And what it will do, let's say if you press button A, it's not actually going to test whether B was pressed or C was pressed. It's going to go right down past the conditional. It'll go down here, whatever that next set of instructions is. So as soon as it gets a true, it'll execute the next line of code and it'll skip down. So let's say I go, if button A, no, they didn't hit button. They did hit button B. Okay, cool. Do this thing, skip this, and then go down here. And we'll show you an example in EarSketch. This is all about the concept. So in EarSketch, so go ahead and open up EarSketch. If you go to teach.breakbeatcode.com, now we're going to go into this, so you can go ahead and see this example. The weird thing that you'll need to get used to is this operator right here. And students will get confused as well. When you are assigning a variable, it's an equal sign. So if you want to say house equals this sound, you say an equal sign. When you're checking whether something is valid, when you're saying, does this equal that, it's two equal signs. The way I remember it, my mnemonic device with students, which I think works, I remember it as saying, does it really, really equal? Okay, because it's checking to see whether it's equal. If it was just a single equal sign, it's saying, well, this is equal to that. Two equals means you're asking or you're testing to see whether one thing equals the other. So does it really, really equal? So I'm going to go back into the slides. And so we're going to learn how to create them. I'm going to show you how they execute different blocks of code with actual Python syntax in EarSketch. We're also going to use that input function. So we're going to show you how to use the input function with conditionals and how to use conditionals in EarSketch. The one thing that the problem that you will have as coaches at this point in the process, though, as you're teaching students new things, right now they've gotten really excited about creating music. And right now they know enough to create cool music. This is your challenge as a coach to get them re-engaged, because they're just gonna, like, what I've experienced this multiple different times, where they get to this point and they're like, you're kind of like just teaching me new stuff, but actually you're kind of getting in the way of me creating music. That's something that this is the point you have to manage. Like right up to this point, like the for loops are fun because they like basically start playing around with verses. While loops are cool because they have like, these intervals. Right now, like we're teaching them how to use the conditional and how to do something with it, be like a DJ request, to make it really engaging and interesting. Like the example, for students that are that want to jump ahead, the ones that need the higher ceiling to go further along and the wider walls, I challenge students to come up with a cool way to use conditionals. So this is I tell them, like, this is the basics. This is just a basic example. And any way of you can copy and paste this, you'll be able to figure it out, and you'll break it and learn from it. But this is like the minimum of what we want to do. If this makes sense and you feel like you're comfortable with it, create a new script and do something that we haven't done here before. Do something with your music that you haven't done with before. Think of like a weird way to use this. Think of a creative way to use this. Try to come up with something none of us have seen before. And some cool things that they've done. One student actually took the analogy from the game that we were using to teach them conditionals. Like, well, actually, why don't I actually think of this as a game? And so his condition, this person's conditional, this child, the student, it was like a pop-up window. And then if you want to attack, you'd hit like attack, and then like could change the music, like the way it would in video games, like boom, 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 like it would drop down to like a minor key and like be like more aggressive. Or if you want to run away, it'd be like more like a faster paced song, like super clever, right? I would have told him to do that. That wasn't like wasn't gonna think of that. And that was just a really great example of many of, like, if you challenge them, for the students that you kind of feel like if you feel like they are pulled back into just going to create something on their own, I would strongly, like, I would want to challenge them to say, we want you to see you do this, but if you feel like jumping ahead, show me what you can do with conditional. Yeah. And it's like, you can frame it in that way so that it's like, they're not like being assigned something, they're being challenged. Okay. So back to the story of what we're doing here. Okay. So we created 3 variables for 3 different sounds. So house, electro, and hip hop. So that we've all seen before. We've created this thing called a input function. Input function is really a simple concept. So you can see it's a variable, right? Request that we've created equals input. And input's just a built-in function in Python, and it takes 1 argument. That's the argument is in parentheses. And that argument is simply it's like a field on a screen, like that you'd see. Think of like of a form that you're filling out. Think of a button that you're seeing when you press a button on a screen. They'll have a label, and that'll be a way to receive input. In this case, it's just going to create a pop-up window. And the label of that pop-up window, the prompt, like what you're telling the user to do, is this, whatever in quotation marks. In this case, the prompt is choose the genre, house, electro, or hip hop. Now, at this point, it's good to just call out that we're going to get into genres later. But the basic thing about a genre is that it's a category of music. You know, the way rock is a category of music or gospel is a category of music. So we're just going to get our users to pick a genre. We could get them to put anything into that field, like whatever we put into quotation marks. It's like, pick your favorite color. You can put that into quotation marks. Whatever they type in, they'll be typing in as a string. A string is simply characters. And then it'll be saved. Whatever I type in there will be saved to the request variable. So in this case, it'll be like a pop-up window that's automatically created. It'll say, choose the genre. There's the prompt. And then the user will type in house, for example. Then the conditional will handle that response. So we have this conditional right here, and it's just checking the different values that the user might type in. It's pretty simple. We'll walk through it step by step. It's probably easier if I'm not going to drill into what's happening here. Just know that it's an if, else, and depending on what the user says, it's going to assign different values to main beat, which is a variable we created, and tempo, which is just the variable for setting the tempo. Down here, it'll just print those values, and then it'll use that set tempo function to either set it to the house tempo or the electro tempo or the hip hop tempo. And main beat will be one of these main beats. And it's just going to place a single beat on track 1, starting at measure 1, ending measure 20. So line 1, it goes into requests. It creates the pop-up window. I type in house, I hit OK. And then it runs like the entire script. And so it creates these variables. And this over here, this is my conceptual view of what happens in memory. So it creates these house, electro, and hip hop as variable names and assigns these sounds. It creates the pop-up window when you run it. That's what happened when you hit the run button. That's how it, you saw the prompt. And then once you type that in, that value, in this case, the user types in house, request now equals house in quotation marks. So now I can take that user input, I can test it, like to see what they said. If they typed in house, I'm going to set my main beat to house, which is this main beat. In this case, the request did equal house. So it's like, OK, that's true. And so because it's true, then it will follow the instructions. Whatever's indented here, main beat now equals the same as the house drums up here. And so you can see they're now the same. And now tempo equals 120. Ignore this code. So this is the really important thing about conditionals. Once it gets in true, and once it executes the block of code underneath that true statement, it'll ignore the rest. It skips down to here. Let's listen to what it sounds like. Let's run it again and choose electro as the genre. Click the run button. This time we'll type in electro as our user input to see what happens in EarSketch. The Python interpreter reads the next line of code to check to see if request is equal to house. The Python interpreter can see it is false. The request variable equals electro, not house. It doesn't execute the next two lines of code, that block of code. It ignores it completely because it only would have executed the code that is indented here if request equals house. It skips to line 23. The Python interpreter reads the next line of code to check to see if the request is equal to electro. The Python interpreter can see it's true. The request variable equals electro. It goes to the next line and reads the instructions. The variable mainBeat is created and now it equals electro. In the computer's memory, we can see that mainBeat now has the same value of electro. On the next line, the tempo variable is created and it's set to 125. The Python interpreter ignores the next block of code below the else statement. It skips down to line 30. Remember, Python is reading the code from top to bottom. Once the Python interpreter finds a conditional statement that's true, it does not check the other conditions. It follows the instructions to print the value of mainBeat, so we see the current value of mainBeat on the display below. Next, it interprets the instructions to print tempo, so we see 125, which is the value of tempo on the display below. Next, it interprets the instructions to set tempo to 125. When we play it, the tempo will now be 125 beats per minute. And then it follows the instructions on the next line, which uses fit media to place electro drum mainBeat 001 on track 1, starting at measure 1, ending at measure 20. Run it again, this time with hip hop. Now request equals, doesn't equal house. Great, false, skip that. Electro, nope, false, skip that. So it just says else. So notice there's nothing that says elif request equals hip hop. And the reason is you don't need it. You don't need to test whether it's hip hop because if it's not house or electro, it's just going to default to hip hop. And much the same way, if I don't think of what I want to play, I'm probably going to play hip hop on Spotify. That's my default. So it's just going to execute this code if they didn't type in house or electro, if they typed in hip hop, or if they typed in gibberish, like just nonsense characters. And so it'll just set the mainBeat to hip hop, and then it will set tempo to 100. It'll run the code this time with that sound at that tempo up here. All right. And so, like I said, if they type in gibberish, like just random characters, then it'll default to hip hop. And that's the concept of else. Else just means if all else fails, if none of these previous statements are true, just do this. That's like the default thing to play. So I typed in GDDYQE, just gibberish. And so it knows that, okay, that's not house, that's not electro. Fine, I'll just play hip hop, right? So you don't actually have to type in the words hip hop for it to work. And that's the concept. And so you can go ahead and import to edit, go into teach.breakbeatcode.com, open up Conditionals, import it, break it, have some fun with that. And once you've broken it, what I want you to do is, I go up, like just ping us in chat and let us know how you've broken it. That's like my main thing I want you to do is break it. Okay, let's break it the way you told me. So the first one is one equal. Okay, so if request equals house, in this case, it's a syntax error because you can only use a single equal sign if you're assigning a value to a variable. If you're asking, in case of an if, you need to use equals equals. So does it really, really equal? Okay, so I'm going to go here, just for the sake of this, to keep my text straight. I'm going to do else and this. Very, very good one. So it gives me a parse error. So an interesting thing to do here is just do that and see if it works. And it should. But I can go in house, and that'll work. It'll actually play hip hop. Like someone also said, what if you did like it's case sensitive, they pointed out. So if I type house, it'll do house. if I type anything else, if I try to do electro, obviously I've copied that. I've commented that out. The problem of doing an elif after you do else is the same problem if you just went in here and just said elif, because it's basically, it's got to start with an F. That's your indication that we're starting off a conditional. Okay, so so you're saying like else equals hip hop, for example, I think is what we're trying to say. And that should give me a syntax error, I hope. Yep. Okay, cool. Because else, when it's else, it's just, you're not actually checking a value. You're just saying, if none of these things are true, do this. But you don't have like an else something equals something. You know, else is always just followed by a colon. If you forget to have an else conditional to get, well, if I run the code and I just type in house, it doesn't care that I don't have an else, because it actually skips this code. It ignores it completely. Let me actually do a little funky little test here and see if this works. I'll just say just gibberish. I haven't tried to break it this way. Well, let's try this out. It should work though. I go house, and even though this is gibberish, like even though this is like, if I ran this up here, like just randomly typed in characters, it should hopefully throw me an error, right? That'd be a syntax error. And this is a really good way to break it. Thank you. This could be completely broken code underneath this elif, like anything indented here, but it completely ignores it. If it tests if one of these things is true. If house, great, fine. If you type in house, that's great. I'll completely skip this. It doesn't matter what you type down here, and I'll go down to the end of this conditional, which is now the only active code down here is 31. And then it'll work for electro. Oh, so happy you broke it this way. So, and it goes to electro again, it skips this code down here. But if you type in random letters or hip hop, that's when it's like, oh wait, hang on. I've had this thing called main beat, which I've never heard of before. But why is it saying name beat is not defined? That's a little bit weird. Why is main beat not defined? Why do you think?
Well, none of the conditions, step through code that actually define a variable named main beat, so exactly. It doesn't never has been brought into existence.
Yes, exactly. So main beat was never defined because main beat was always defined as part of the block of code. Yeah, exactly. Nice one. Does this make sense? This is a really good way to break it. It's like, as you can see, I get nerdy excited every time someone breaks the code in a new way that I haven't thought of in a while. I haven't broken it this way in a long time. That's a great way to break it. I might never have broken it that way. That's very, very good. And that's what I would encourage you very strongly with your students, is to get excited when they break code. I get more excited about them breaking code than them creating cool music. Like that's like, because that is just gold. If they can break the code, they can fix it. And the feedback that we've gotten when we teach this, actually might have been in this session or a previous one, is that normally that's not how coding is taught. Normally coding is not taught with breaking code. And this like, once I started doing this in my classes, it went from students like expressing profound frustration when they started breaking their code and the sense of failure, to them like laughing about it, especially when we got the while loops. They actually had fun breaking it, and then they got into it, and like they weren't getting errors anymore, or they were getting them and they're fixing them without anything. Whereas before, they'd stare at the screen and like the errors, they just like, they just weren't making sense to them because they hadn't experienced failure in that particular way. Let's see, I typed in house, and then I got, yeah, so very cool one. Very, very cool. Why did it, I typed in house, it should have been assigned to maybe, it should have been assigned to tempo. Like sort of rationally, surely it would skip the rest and just go down here, because we said it was going to skip the rest in conditionals. So why is it, I typed in house, and it should have assigned it to main beat, to house to main beat, so it should have been the house music. but now it's playing hip hop. Why is that happening? Yeah, so let's step through this. It goes, if it equals house. Well, it does equal house. That's fine. So temporarily, main beat does equal the house main beat. And for on line 22, tempo does equal 120. Then it gets to line 23, it starts a new conditional. And it says, well, hang on. If request equals electro, do this. And it still equals house. That's fine. Main beat, so it's going to skip that. But then it gets to else, because basically this is not true. So it goes to else, and it says like, well, if this wasn't true, we're going to change it to hip hop. So at one point, it did actually equal house. But then it starts a new conditional, and this is quite confusing to think of it this way. But like, basically, it checked house. That's fine. And then, main beat equal house and tempo equal 120. But then it says, well, check again, because I'm going to create a new conditional. And it's like, okay, this time I check, and it's not electro. But it doesn't actually check to see if it's house. So because it's checked again, and it says, well, let me check again. Does it equal electro? No. All right, well, then it equals hip hop. In order to demonstrate what's happening in the code, what I could do is this. Print, I'll say print first try, and I'll say comma main beat. All right, so that might be a better way for me to illustrate this. I'm going to type in house. And you'll notice the first time around, the first try, where it prints it here, it actually does equal, main beat actually equals house drums. But then it goes back to test again, and it says, well, does it equal electro? No. All right, well, if it doesn't equal electro, in this new conditional, it equals main beat. So that's what I'm saying. It's not the same as me just commenting this out. Because if I comment it out, then, and I typed in house, it would just test whether it equaled electro, and then whatever else it happened, it would just do hip hop. But because it did if, it comes up, it's a very weird bug, because at one point, it actually did equal house. Briefly, for like a few lines of code, it said, okay, it equals house, but then it says, okay, now starting again, let's test if it's electro. You can't have two ifs. Doing two ifs, it's basically you're doing two totally separate conditionals. Like it's saying, I'm initializing this conditional, test this. If it equals house, do this thing. I'm starting a brand new conditional. This time, if it equals electro, do this. Otherwise, do this. So it's effectively like, because that just says if and else, it basically overwrites, main beat and 120. So whatever you change up here, it just says, well, actually, I'm overwriting that because you checked again. You did this another if-else condition. That's a really interesting bug. Okay, so that's the thing. When it says what basically is happening, that's another way to think about it. I finished the first conditional. This is another way to think about it. And I'll say first try, we picked, I'll just say first try, first check, request, and it equaled health. Was equal to health. So I'll see if I can use it. And the print function is a really good way to illustrate what's happening in the code. Oops, what did I do? Oh, I didn't use quotation marks. Print functions are good, and I think there's the one easiest way to say this is that printing, when you're teaching, and actually when you're debugging to some extent, with debugging, it's kind of a hacky way to test. It's a way to make a quick test. There's more structured and proper ways to do tests. But when I'm debugging, I use print to just say, tell me the current state, in this case, of these variables. And right here, when I first checked the request variable, it was equal to house. So like at the end of the statement, it said, okay, it was equal to house. I did these things, and I finished the first conditional. And now I start the second conditional. So it did skip, but it skipped to line 25. All right. And when it skipped to line 25, I printed that out. And then it started again. It says, well, let me test this again. Did it equal electro? And because it didn't equal electro, it basically change the value of main beat and typo. So you might as well not have actually done this up here because you've like basically started a second conditional. It's a little bit weird. There's a kind of a weird bug, actually. Technically not an error. You're not getting an error message. It's a bug. It's unexpected behavior. If there's another if, it needs to start from the top and say, because like right here, it did skip down to the end of this conditional, but that was the end of the conditional. And when you did another if testing the same exact values, request, it says, oh, okay, so you want to check request. Fine. Does it equal electro? No. Okay, so you're telling me if it doesn't equal electro, now I just set main beat to hip hop? Okay, I'll do that. Fine, because it's reading top to bottom. Really good one. Next time I teach this, actually tomorrow, I think I'm going to slow down and give them more time to break it. I think probably as a teacher, I think I get impatient too once I get to this point because I'm excited about the kids, the students like creating music. So taking the time to like let them break it more, give them space to do that can be really fun. That was cool because you get like it also gets you thinking. It's like computational thinking. You start to think, step through the code. You start to think like the computer's thinking. And it's like, okay, so yeah, and that's why it's not making decisions. It's pretty dumb, right? It's just following a set of rules. If you give it a funky set of rules, as we did in this case, it'll do unexpected things. So we'll leave it at that. Yeah, I mean, it's a good way to learn because I'm learning. I'm relearning some of this stuff. I forgot about these ways to break it. It's cool. Awesome. Thank you. That was great.